How's it going, my awesome bakers? Today I'm back with another whole grain breakfast roll recipe, and this one's quite a bit softer than the previous one, so let's go to the kitchen and check it out. Okay, as promised, here's my extra soft whole grain breakfast roll recipe. This softness is achieved by scalding some of the flour, a method also known as yudane. Part of the flour of the recipe is mixed with boiling water. The boiling water gelatinizes the starch of the flour, essentially cooking it. Then that mix is added to the main dough, and the result is a bread with a soft and bouncy crumb, and it will stay softer for longer too. If you are new to this method, you can find a detailed video about it in the Principles of Baking playlist. But if you've been here for a while, you know I love this method, and I use it quite often lately, and we will definitely make some more recipes using it. It is the ultimate way of making your buns and breads nice and soft. So let's get right to it and see how it's done. Let's start with the ingredients. We'll need some whole wheat flour, we'll need some whole rye flour, also known as dark rye flour, we'll need some white bread flour, yeast, salt, malt syrup, this is optional, you can also use different flavored syrups. For even more softness, we're using some butter and some seeds for coating the rolls with. I'm using sesame seeds this time. As for the equipment, we'll need a tray with some non-stick paper, a bowl, scales, a dough scraper, a temperature probe, and that's all we need. To get more flavor out of the caraway seeds, I decided to crush them slightly with a pestle and mortar. It is not totally necessary, and if you don't have one of these, simply use more caraway seeds. Or just skip them altogether if you don't like them. Come to think of it, fennel seeds will work quite nicely here. But of course they're your rolls, flavor them with whatever you like. Okay, so caraway seeds are crushed, we can move on to making the scald. Pour the boiling water into a large bowl and then add the caraway seeds. As soon as the caraway seeds hit the boiling water, they will infuse it with their flavor. Give it a quick stir and then continue by adding the whole grain rye flour and the white bread flour. The reason why I'm using a portion of white flour in this recipe is because it will make the buns even softer. Okay, mix your scald until there's no more dry flour left, and then spread it over the sides of the bowl so it cools down sooner. Cover the bowl with a lid and leave it to cool down for around 1 hour. Quite a lot of moisture will collect on the lid, so when you take it off, shake it back into the bowl. We don't want to lower the hydration of our dough too much. Okay, the scald has cooled down significantly, but it's still a little bit warm. We are aiming for a final dough temperature of around 25 to 26 degrees Celsius or 77 to 79 Fahrenheit. That's why I'm using cool water for the main dough. Okay, pour the water into the bowl, add the yeast, the salt, and the malt syrup if you are using it. You can use honey instead, maple syrup, or just leave it out altogether. It's there for flavor and sweetness, so if you're not into that, just leave it out. Okay, mix everything well. You want to dissolve the salt completely and hydrate the yeast. Now add the butter, and this is also here for softness. You can swap this for oil if you want, but if you want maximum softness, use butter. Okay, now we can add the final ingredient, the whole wheat flour. Grab your dough scraper and mix it to a dough. Mix until there's no dry flour left. And then mix a little bit longer, for another half a minute or so. If you start struggling with the scraper, continue on by hand. Once it's all mixed up, scrape it all together and let's take its temperature. As I mentioned, we are aiming for 25 to 26 degrees. That's what we got. Right, let's cover this dough up and leave it to rest for 15 minutes. This is a no-knead dough, but we need to build some strength into it. We're going to achieve this by giving it a few folds. Dust your dough with flour lightly, then grab your scraper and release the dough from the bowl. Tip it out on the table with the smooth side down. Now flatten it slightly, then fold the edge over the middle and keep going around in a circle until you reach the point where you started. Then flip it smooth side up again and tighten it against the table. It will be slightly sticky, but don't be tempted to use more flour. Place the dough back into the bowl, cover it up and leave it to rest for 15 more minutes. After the second resting stage, we can perform the second fold. It's exactly the same as earlier. Dust your dough with flour, tip it out on the table, flatten it, fold it, flip it smooth side up again, tighten it, place it back into the bowl, cover it up, leave it to rest for 15 more minutes. And after the third resting stage, we can perform the third fold, which is the final fold in this recipe. And it works exactly the same as the two previous folds. After the final fold, place the dough back into the bowl and let it rest for 15 more minutes. Now it's time to divide this dough. I'm making 8 buns, so I'm dividing this into 8 equal pieces. If you want them to be slightly larger, you can divide it into 6. In fact, the larger they are, the softer they will be. And vice versa, of course. I wouldn't suggest making them any smaller. By the way, if you are into breads like this, and that is whole grain, multigrain breads, you can find a whole playlist of them on my channel. Okay, after dividing, we need to shape them into rounds. And this step is quite like the fold earlier. Flatten the dough, fold the edge over the middle, going around in a circle until you reach the point where you started, flip it smooth side up again, tighten it against the table, and that's your dough ball done. Now just repeat with the other 7. If the dough feels a little bit too sticky for you, dust it slightly with flour. And I really mean dust them lightly. If you throw too much flour on the table, it will make it impossible to shape them. Okay, let's coat these dough balls in sesame seeds. And since they are quite sticky, the seeds will stick to them quite well. Saying that, they will fall off quite easily after baking. So if you want your seeds to really stick to the bun, then you can use some kind of glaze to brush at least the top of them before you dip them in the seeds. You can find a full video about glazing in the Principles of Baking playlist. In that video, I demonstrated 15 of the most commonly used glazes in bread making, so it's definitely worth a watch, even if you are not planning to glaze these buns. Okay, these are ready for cold proofing. Pop them in the fridge, and you can leave them in there for 12 and up to 24 hours. Then again, aiming for maximum softness, one thing I've noticed, especially with whole wheat rolls, is that they benefit from warming up slightly at room temperature before being baked. And if your rolls haven't puffed up much during cold fermentation, it is even more important to leave them out at room temperature for a bit. So whilst you are preheating your oven to 210 degrees Celsius fan off, and that is 410 degrees Fahrenheit, let your buns warm up a bit and rise a bit further. As you can see, mine did puff up quite a bit. It is a good idea to spray them with some water before baking them. A little spray bottle like this can come in really handy. If you don't have one, don't worry too much, they'll be perfectly fine without it. But there are certain benefits to moistening your dough before it hits the oven. I have also made a full video about this, which you can find in the Principles of Baking playlist. A spray bottle is not the only piece of equipment that can be used for steaming. There are several more methods that you can use, but the spray bottle is my favorite as of late. Okay, let's get these bad boys in the oven. And if you are using spray bottle like I am, then spritz the inside of the oven too before closing the door. They will take no longer than 20 minutes to bake, and once they are nicely golden brown all over, they are ready. Don't expect them to puff up massively. It is a hearty whole wheat dough, and it reached most of its potential during fermentation already. Okay, leave your buns to cool down slightly, then you can tuck in. And remember, no matter which method you use, bread will start staling as soon as it's finished baking. All we try to do using these methods like scalding is slowing down this process. And besides, I don't see the point of baking bread and then leaving it to sit around. If you don't eat that much bread, then just cut the recipe in half and bake more often. Or share it with someone whilst it's still fresh. These are meant to be cold fermented breakfast rolls. Bake them and eat them for your breakfast. This is what they look like 12 hours later, still nice and soft and bouncy. So they may as well be nice and soft come tomorrow's breakfast, but I never found out because I ate them all. So what do you think these rolls? Have you tried any of my other breakfast roll recipes? Let me know down in the comments. If you want to see more videos like this one, click over here. Subscribe to the channel, click right here. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.